Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Life and Death with Vail. I'm Vail. Today, we're going to be doing something a little different than just regular problems. We will get to those. But because we missed a posting on Saturday, which is when we usually do Life and Death, I thought I would do uh, a double post today, or double upload, I guess. Today, I'm going to be doing Life and Death, and shortly after this, I'll be doing one of the endgame videos. But for this one, I wanted to go back a little bit. We were doing some problems last time we got together, but now I want to show some basic shapes. And this is really fundamental stuff. This is stuff that if you are 18 to 20Q, you should really know these things. And the reason is that if you don't know which shapes are dead or which shapes are alive, then you're going to play superfluous moves. You're going to play moves that don't matter, and that's the same as passing. And if the game of Go is all about efficiency. If you can be more efficient at playing moves than your opponent, then you're going to be able to tell your story better. You're going to be able to move through the phases of the game, the opening, which is kind of like the outline of your game, the middle game, which is like the drafting period where you're deciding which parts of the board are yours, which parts are your opponent's. And then you're going to be able to get into the end game cleaner than your opponent. If you are able to read better, reading is the single most important skill you can have. If you have the ability to imagine moves in your head without actually playing them on the board, then you are going to succeed far more than those who cannot do that. And the best way to get good at that skill is by studying life and death. However, life and death problems almost always revolve around knowing which shapes are alive and which shapes are dead. So here we have a completely unrealistic board, but we're going to go through the shapes that are alive and shapes that are dead, and we're going to see just really basic stuff, which ones we can save and which ones we can't. Starting down here in the bottom left, we have a three space eyes, enclosed area containing three spaces, but you'll notice that their shape is slightly different. When you get down to such a small area, three spaces, uh, this is the minimum area that you need to live. Because if white plays here, you'll notice that now white has two eyes, and it's self-explanatory that black cannot play in either of them, so therefore this shape is alive. Same is true here. There are two eyes here. Black can do nothing about that. However, you'll notice that the same is true if black plays here first. There's no way now. There's no way for white to live. Same thing in this shape. There is no way for white to live. So this shape is called unsettled. And the terminology can be a little funny, but basically an unsettled shape is whoever gets to play there first gets to kill it or make it alive. So if white plays here first, then it lives. If black plays here first, then it dies. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Now let's go on to shapes that have four spaces in them. This shape that's on the wall, like this, if they're in a line, this is unconditionally alive. Unconditionally alive. I'm sorry, not unconditionally alive. It is alive, but it's alive in the sense that white has to make a response move. If black plays here, then white can play here to make their second eye. Vice versa, if black plays here, then white can play here to make the second eye. So white still needs to respond on the inside, but is in no danger of dying if they do so. However, if white was to play in here, this is a bad move. This is a bad move because it's basically a pass. You're basically saying, go ahead, black, play somewhere else on the board. I'm going to make sure this is alive. But you were already alive. So you see why it's important to know that this is alive already. If this shape was already on the board, however, this is now a new category. It's called unconditionally alive. Black can play on either of these points, and white does not have to respond at all. Sometimes you will find yourself in a position where you have a group that, hopefully you find yourself in this position a lot, where you have a group that your opponent can do nothing to kill. If that is the case, then that group is unconditionally alive. And this is one of the simplest examples of that. However, we don't want to make the mistake of thinking that all groups that are enclosing 4 points are unconditionally alive. If you have made this particular shape, then you're in trouble, because white needs to play 2 moves inside to make 2 eyes. You'll see that if white plays one of these, now he's made this shape. He's only enclosing 3 points, and by playing a single point in there, black can kill that whole space. Therefore, white needs to play 2 moves on the inside, which black will certainly not let him do. And that's why this shape here of enclosing 4 points is very, very bad. Um, it's basically completely dead. Now we move on to 5 points. This 5 point group here is similar to this group over here, in that whoever, even if black plays inside, white can make their second eye by playing somewhere else inside. So, similar to this 4 space area, there is no imperative to play here as white. Let me see this. Oh, before we move on too much further, I forgot. This is another 4 point space here. So this is 4 points, this is 4 points, this is 4 points. They're all different slightly. This one required 2 moves inside. This one is alive and white does not need to play another move in here immediately. However, this space is symmetrical and does need a move immediately from white to live, or black can kill it with this point. Typically, the key to life and death problems is forcing your opponent to make a symmetrical shape, and being able to play on the inside in the middle of that shape. If you can do that, then you can usually win. So this is a force. This is the key point, the vital point of this. Whoever plays there first will either kill or live. All right, sorry about that. Now let's move on to the 5 point spaces. We talked about how this was similar to this 5 point space. However, this space here, we're going to come back to this later, but this is also 5 spaces, 5 points, and is different in the sense that this is the vital point. If black plays this point, then the whole shape dies, and if white plays there, then the shape lives. The reason this is special, in my opinion, is that this shape is probably one of the most common shapes to appear on the board naturally, and we see it down here in the bottom right. This is a natural shape that occurs from black trying to surround white after perhaps a failed invasion in the corner. Now, if black is able to play here, black kills the shape. And again, if white is able to play here, white lives. Very important to memorize this. It's called the bulky 5. Many of these shapes have special names, but you really need to know if you're making this shape, or in the process of making that shape. So that's 5 space eyes. Let's move on to 6 spaces, and that will wrap us up for the general shapes. If you are able to make an eye, which is, if you're able to enclose 7 points, then you are usually alive. You're usually in a position where you can play elsewhere, and if black plays inside your 7 point area, you can play somewhere else in there and live. If you're able to enclose 7 points, you don't need to worry about it too much. 6 points and below is where we get into these shapes that you need to memorize. 6 points here. And notice that here, white is alive, because if black plays here, white can play here, and if black tries to poke out one eye, white can make an eye on the other side. However, same is true here, by the way. If black plays here, then white can play here, and there's nothing that black can do to poke out both eyes simultaneously. But you'll notice that this completely changes, even though this white group is technically, actually this should be up in the corner here, I apologize. Imagining that, if we imagine that that these stones are the upper wall here, or that they're gone, and that this is the ninth line is the wall. Just imagine that with me for a moment. Sorry about that. Should have put that up there. Uh, if black plays here, then when white plays here, black can descend. If now, in order to get another eye, white would need to play here, but notice that that kills the whole group. So, therefore, this is the vital point and kills the shape. So, bear that in mind, that just because you happen to be enclosing 6 points, if you're in the corner with this particular shape, then it's more risky than others. In fact, it's very similar in a way to this shape. If you make boxy living shapes, they're much more tenuous. They're much more likely to be killed than other shapes, like shapes that have some better eye potential, like this group up here, or this line over here. If you're making boxes, then you need to be careful. If you're making boxes that have less than 6 points, and that is pretty much it. Here's another point. It's called what do they call this? The flowery six. Yeah, flowery six. Apparently, it looks like a flower in Japanese or in Japan. However, this is a very symmetrical shape, and again, we always need to be careful of symmetry because this point is the vital point. So if white plays there, it lives, but if black plays here, it dies. All right, keeping that in mind, now let's move on to some actual problems for life and death. Those were basic life and death shapes. Now we're going to take a look at this group, these problems. So these are different ways of reducing eye space to get things like the bulky 5. Let's take a look at these problems. I'll give you a few minutes here. I'll pause your video and see if you can figure out how to reduce these shapes to dead shapes. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance now to look at these problems, and they are useful problems to examine because they highlight the 4 different techniques used most often in life and death. So the first technique for mastering life and death that we're going to talk about is called Hane placement. Starting with a Hane and then placing a stone on the inside. Here in this diagram, we will notice that if black plays here, white needs to block that. And then black can play here and white needs to block that. Now notice what white has made. White has made a bulky 5. A 5-point group that we know from studying the previous section of this video, the first part, is dead by playing the vital point. Notice that the Hanes came first, so these 2 moves, the move here at D19, you can do this in any order, but D19 in this scenario, then another Hane at A16 block, and then a placement on the inside. So that's why it's called the Hane placement technique. We're basically just reducing the eye space down to a dead shape and then playing on the inside. Boom, boom. And we don't need to protect here. We don't need to fill because, as you'll see, after the placement, even if black captures, it's not an eye because this is an Atari. So black can either take it back or white will need to fill. So both sides. All right, let's move on to this one. This shape is slightly different. It does not use a Hane technique first. It uses a throw-in. Or I'm sorry, not a throw-in. It uses, I think it is a Hane. Yeah, okay. It's this highlights the difference, the fact that you can sometimes change the order. So it is a Hane placement. It's the same style of life and death technique as this problem over here, except the order is different. The placement comes first, because if we start with a Hane, then uh, white will play here, and if black extends, attempting to poke out the eye, white will just play here, and he's got two eyes. Notice that now he has two eyes. So uh, the standard Hane first does not work, so therefore we look for the vital point and we do the throw-in first, or the placement, the inside placement. When we place here first, white has to block at R19, otherwise this would be an Atari. After that, then black can Hane, and any attempt to stop black from coming in allows black to kill with this move, poking out the last eye. Again, we don't need to worry about this because, actually, I'm sorry, because white cannot turn this into an eye. All right, so Hane placement or placement Hane are is the first technique we're looking at. The second technique is called a throw-in Tsuji. Take a look at this problem down here. The throw-in happens here. I'll go past first. If black plays here, that looks like a stupid move at first, except that after the capture is made, then black can take this move and reduce the eye space. Now there's no way for, notice that if white plays here, black can play at R1 and white has to fill that eye. If white tries to make more eye space, you can just poke that out. It's not a big deal. This can never be an eye now that this has happened. But this is a Tsuji that you need to know in advance. So this is a throw-in. I'm sorry, this is the throw-in. Of course, if white ignores this and tries to play something else, then this is just captured and there's no life here. And finally, we have a shortage of liberties. This is a fun one. The key point here is for black to play here. Where is white going to get its eyes? If white tries to make some eye space here, then black can play the Atari here, and after the capture, black extends up. Isn't that cool? So these are the three techniques that are most useful in life and death problems. Number one, the Hane placement or placement Hane, the throw-in, and the shortage of liberties. These types of techniques can be studied on their own, but the best way to do them is just by doing problems. So next week we'll get back into problems and problems that I haven't examined ahead of time, and we'll be learning as we go. So until then, have a great rest of your day, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care.